So my third question is regarding the presentation you just did. So you presented about the Canadian, but regarding Quebec ecosystem and the opportunities within Korea. So could you explain briefly more about the presentation you just introduced here at NextRise?
Thank you so much. So my presentation title was Quebec, Korea, Cases and Opportunities. So I presented about, of course, general information on Canada and Quebec, but also some of the successful cases, especially many of the joint research program I established or startup programs where we send, like, for example, Seoul startups to Montreal or Gyeonggi startups to Sontag, or we also bring missions, etc. So I talked about, information in general, but of course, especially programs that startups or VCs or practitioners in NextRise, what they would like to hear, what they could do with us, especially, for example, their startups. Maybe if they listen to the presentation, they always wanted to maybe go abroad. But quite often people would think, oh, Silicon Valley, which is fine. Of course, that's
Silicon
America.
Valley.
That's of course, it is the top ecosystem. But as I could imagine, if you just go there, like, no offense, like, who are you? So I would say, hey, there's people like me in the Quebec government office here. Why don't you work with me? Create a good portfolio case in Quebec and maybe all of Canada, doing POCs, doing research, all that. And then with that portfolio, then you go to America. And then they're like, Mario, oh, look, I already worked with Quebec here, Canada, this and that. I already know the ecosystem. And Canada, America is kind of one business-ish ecosystem as well.
Yeah.
So if you have a good case in Canada and Quebec, you could use that and people recognize that in Silicon Valley or in America as well. Just Korea's fine too, but Korea's a bit, it's a different ecosystem. But when Americans see, oh, you already work with Canada and Quebec, hey, we're kind of like one business area. Oh, let's do it together. So we often promote ourselves as a gateway to other areas such as North America. So that
Yeah.
also works very well. And I also mentioned about some of the upcoming conferences and places that I'll be or Quebec will be. Because the main thing about collaboration, you have to meet.
Yeah.
Yes, email and Zoom's okay, but I mean that could only go so far. You have to meet, like, have a meal, maybe grab beer, and actually like really develop the relation. Yes, tech in itself is important too, but I think relationship probably is even more important.
Yeah.
So always my job and the presentation is telling about all the success, all the things we could do together, things, conferences in Quebec and Canada and in Korea and elsewhere, like CES, so that people could contact me and I could put them in touch. Either I go or not. But the key is they have to meet their counterpart Quebec people, Canadians, so they could collaborate together.
Thank you so much. So I have one last question for you. So last week we were here at the Smart Tech Korea, and how much work, like what does it mean to receive this kind of like title, the Quebec as a nation of honor in Korea?